I am an Aries woman, and the moment I found out, I was already gone. That's the thing about me that people never quite understand until they've lived it up close. I don't deliberate. I don't sit in a corner of my bedroom at 3 in the morning making a list of pros and cons, weighing all the evidence, giving the benefit of the doubt one more time. That's not how I'm built. My instincts move faster than my logic, and my logic is already fast. When something lands wrong, it lands wrong. There's no second reading of the room. There's no slow unraveling. There's just the moment of impact, and then there's what comes after. And what comes after, with me, is always motion. His name was Daniel. I want to say that clearly, right at the start, because I spent too long in that relationship letting things go unnamed, letting things stay soft and blurry around the edges. And that's not who I am. That was who I tried to be for him. I tried to be patient. I tried to be the version of myself that waits before reacting, that breathes before speaking, that gives space before demanding answers. I tried it for 2 years, and it looked a lot like love from the outside. From the inside, it felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Not uncomfortable enough to tear off immediately, but never quite right either. Always a little too tight across the shoulders. We met when I was 26. He was in the same professional orbit, not a coworker exactly, but the kind of person you see at enough of the same events, that eventually not knowing them feels stranger than knowing them. He was charming in a way that took time to process. Not the kind of charm that knocks you over immediately, but the slow-building kind that settles in. Before you realize what's happened, he remembered small things. He followed up on conversations weeks after the fact. He made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when the room was full. And that's a particular kind of skill that I underestimated for too long. I was drawn to him. I won't pretend otherwise. He was intelligent and driven, and he never seemed intimidated by the fact that I moved fast and spoke louder than most people expected me to. A lot of men are intimidated by that. They like the idea of an Aries woman, the fire and the confidence and the energy. But when they actually live with it, when they actually see what it looks like when I decide something and move toward it, without slowing down for approval, they flinch. Daniel never flinched. Or so I thought. The first year was genuinely good. I'm not going to rewrite that to make sense of what came later. It was good. We traveled together. We argued occasionally and resolved things quickly because neither of us liked sitting in tension. And both of us were direct enough to say what we meant. We talked about the future in the specific terms that meant something was real. Not the abstract future talk that couples do to avoid admitting they don't know what they want, but actual conversations with dates and plans and decisions that required both of us to show up. Then something shifted. I noticed it before I could name it. That's how it usually works for me. The feeling arrives before the evidence, and I've learned over the years to trust that gap, to take the unease seriously even when I can't yet explain it. Because my instincts have almost never been wrong about the things that matter. They were not wrong this time. He became less available in ways that weren't obvious. Not dramatically absent, not the kind of absence you can point to and say this is the thing. This is what changed. It was subtler than that. The energy was slightly different. The quality of his attention when we were together had this thin film over it. Like something in him was slightly elsewhere. When I asked about it, he had reasonable explanations that I accepted because I wanted to accept them, and because I was trying to be the kind of woman who doesn't read into everything, who doesn't make problems out of shadows. That trying cost me months. I'm not someone who snoops. I want to make that clear because I think people expect Aries women to be jealous and reactive, and always looking for something to confirm a suspicion. That's not accurate, at least not for me. I trust until I have a reason not to, and then the trust doesn't erode slowly. It breaks completely. like a clean fracture. What happened wasn't snooping. It was an accident, in the most honest sense of the word. We were at his apartment, a Sunday afternoon. The kind of ordinary day that has no reason to become the day everything changed. I was looking for a restaurant recommendation he'd mentioned saving, and his phone was on the table and unlocked, and I saw the name before I meant to. Before I could look away, her name was Sophia. That's what I saw. Just the name at the top of a message thread and the first visible line of text, which was enough. More than enough. Some things you don't need the full picture to understand completely, and this was one of them. The tone of that visible line, the familiarity of it, the particular shorthand that develops between two people who have been in contact for a long time in a way that has nothing to do with professional courtesy or casual friendship. I understood in about 2 seconds what I was looking at. 2 seconds is all it took to understand that the previous months of vague unease had been completely accurate, that my instincts had been right the whole time while I'd been busy trying to silence them. Here's what I did not do. I did not cry. Not right then. I did not throw his phone across the room. I did not immediately start scrolling through the messages looking for a timeline, for the specifics, for the details that would allow me to construct a precise map of the betrayal. I know that surprises people. They expect the explosion, the immediate confrontation, the Aries fire that erupts without warning. And yes, that's in me. I'm not pretending it isn't. But what I felt in that moment wasn't hot. It was cold. The kind of cold that comes from clarity, from the clean, instantaneous certainty that something is finished. I set the phone back down exactly where it had been. I sat for a moment in the quiet of the apartment. His apartment. The apartment where I'd spent enough time that I knew exactly which drawer held the extra coffee filters and which cabinet held the glasses, and which side of the bed was mine. I sat in all of that accumulated familiarity, and I felt it already becoming past tense. That was the Aries in me. Not the anger. Not yet. The speed. The immediate conversion of present into past. The moment I understood, the relationship stopped being something I was in and became something that had already ended. He was in the other room. I heard him moving around. The ordinary sounds of someone who had no idea that the axis had just shifted. And I made a decision, quickly, the way I make most decisions, which is without a lot of visible process, but with an enormous amount of clarity. I was not going to have the confrontation that night. Not because I was afraid of it, and not because I needed time to compose myself, but because I needed to do it correctly. I needed to do it without giving him the opportunity to spin the narrative in real time, without giving him the space to offer explanations that I might be tempted to accept. Because I was still emotionally inside the relationship, I needed to be slightly outside it first, and I was already getting there faster than I expected. Asterisk, 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 I told him I had to go. He looked up with that familiar expression, half surprised, half accustomed to my occasional abrupt departures when something came up. I had a work thing, I said, something that couldn't wait. He nodded and kissed me on the cheek, and I let him. And then I walked out of the apartment and down the stairs and into the street. And I stood on the sidewalk for about 30 seconds in the afternoon light, breathing. Then I went home. The next 3 days were the strangest I'd lived in a long time. From the outside, they probably looked normal, which was intentional. I went to work. I answered messages. I did not reach out to him, and I did not tell anyone what I knew yet, because I was still processing something that I didn't want to process out loud until I understood it fully. I've been mischaracterized my whole life as impulsive, as someone who acts before thinking, and there's truth in that in small situations, in the quick decisions and the sharp words and the immediate responses to things that don't require deliberation. But when something is truly significant, when something reaches the level where the outcome will change the shape of my life, I get very still inside, deceptively still. I think faster in that stillness than most people think at full speed. What I was working out in those 3 days was not whether to leave. That was already decided. What I was working out was how to leave in a way that I could live with, in a way that didn't compromise my integrity, that didn't give him something to use against me, that didn't make me the dramatic one, the explosive one, the woman who overreacted. Because I knew, with complete certainty, that he would try to make this about my reaction rather than his action. That's what people do when they've been caught. They pivot to tone. They make the discovery about the discoverer's response rather than about the thing that was discovered. I was not going to let that happen. On the 4th day, I called him and I told him we needed to talk. He said, sure. What about? In that casual way that confirmed he still had no idea what was coming. We met at a coffee place that was neutral ground, somewhere neither of us had particular associations with, which was deliberate on my part. I'd thought about the setting carefully. Not his apartment, where I'd feel surrounded by the geography of the relationship. Not my apartment, where I'd feel invaded afterward by the ghost of the conversation. Somewhere clean and impersonal and public enough that the structure of the environment would hold us both to a certain civility. I sat down across from him and I said his name, and then I said Sophia's name. That was all I needed to say, really. Those 2 words in that order. I watched his face make the calculation and come up empty on a convincing alternative explanation. And then I watched the beginning of the pivot. The slight shift in posture that preceded the attempt to reframe. I didn't let him start. I told him I wasn't there for an explanation. Not because I didn't deserve one, but because no explanation was going to change anything for me. And I didn't want to sit in a coffee shop listening to someone construct a narrative to protect themselves at the expense of my time and my clarity. I was there to say one thing, which was that we were done. He did what I expected. He tried to talk. He used words like complicated and timeline and nothing serious. And you're not giving me a chance to explain. I let him finish his sentences because I'm not, despite the reputation, someone who doesn't listen. I listened. And then I said again, we're done. With the same steadiness I'd felt since the moment I understood what I'd seen on his phone. Not cold anger. Not hot anger, just clarity stated plainly. The thing that surprised him most, I think, was that I didn't cry. There's this expectation that if you love someone, and I had loved him, the ending must involve visible devastation, that the absence of tears means the absence of feeling. That's not how Aries works. The feeling was there. It was enormous, actually. The grief of it, the waste of it. The specific sadness of losing not just the person, but the future you'd built in your imagination around that person. All of that was real, and I felt it completely. But I was not going to perform it for him in a coffee shop, when he had been the one to create the conditions that led us here. My grief was mine. It wasn't something I owed him the display of. I left the coffee shop first. He was still talking when I stood up. I told him not to reach out for a while, that I meant that seriously. And then I walked out into the street, and I felt the afternoon air on my face, and I kept moving. That's the Aries thing that I've never been able to fully explain to people who aren't built the same way. It's not that the pain doesn't exist. It's that stillness amplifies pain and motion metabolizes it. I needed to move, so I moved. The weeks that followed were not simple. I'm not going to pretend that the decision made everything clean. He did reach out multiple times, which I had anticipated and had prepared myself for. Not in a cold, calculated way, but in the way you prepare for weather you can see coming from a distance. I read the messages and I didn't respond to most of them. Not because I was playing a game, but because I genuinely had nothing to add. Everything I'd needed to say, I'd said. The rest was just him trying to reopen something I had already closed. and reopening it wouldn't have served either of us. What I hadn't anticipated was the particular texture of the loss. I'd lost relationships before. I knew grief, knew the specific loneliness of missing someone while also being glad they were gone. Knew the dissonance of loving what something had been while being clear-eyed about what it had become. But this one had a layer I hadn't dealt with before, which was the disorientation of having spent 2 years adjusting myself to someone, filing down my edges slightly, moderating my pace to match someone else's rhythm, and then suddenly having all of that accommodation become unnecessary. I didn't know what to do with the space it left. It felt strange to have the full range of my own speed back, to not be compensating for anything, to be moving at exactly the rate I naturally moved without awareness. That someone else might not be keeping up. My closest friend, Maya, she asked me once, about 6 weeks after it ended, whether I regretted how fast I'd moved, whether I wished I'd done the confrontation differently, taken more time, asked more questions, maybe even tried to work through it. She wasn't being unkind. She was genuinely trying to understand. I told her that the speed wasn't something I'd chosen. Not exactly. It was just how I work. The decision had been made the second I understood what I was looking at on his phone. And everything after that was execution, not deliberation. There was no version of events in which I'd sat with the knowledge for 3 weeks and gotten to a different conclusion. The conclusion was always the same. The speed was just my nature. What I did tell her, and what I'm telling now, is that the regret I carry is different from what people assume. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret how I left. What I regret is the months before the leaving. The months where I was silencing my own instincts in the name of being reasonable, being measured, being the version of myself that doesn't react too quickly. I was doing it out of love, out of the genuine effort to be a better partner, to not make everything about my pace and my certainty and my immediate read on things. But in trying not to be too much of myself, I ended up abandoning the most reliable part of myself, which was the part that knew, months before I had proof, that something was wrong. That's the lesson, if there is one. Not that I should have acted faster on the suspicion. I'm not sure acting faster would have changed anything meaningful. But I should have trusted what I was feeling instead of working so hard to argue myself out of it. The instincts were right. They're almost always right. The effort to override them didn't make me more reasonable. It just made me slower to see clearly. Oriana. That's her name. That's my name. I've been her my whole life, and I'm still learning her. I know the parts that move fast and the parts that run hot and the parts that can't sit still. In the face of something unresolved, I know the parts that lead and the parts that bristle when told to slow down. I know the fire, because everyone always tells me about the fire. They've been telling me about it since I was a child, as if it were a warning or a flaw, as if the heat of me were something that needed to be managed rather than understood. But I'm also learning the cold version, the particular clarity of ice. The way I can become absolutely still when the situation requires it. How that stillness is not the absence of feeling, but its most concentrated form. I did not run from that coffee shop. I walked deliberately at my own pace in the direction I chose, and I didn't look back. That is the Aries woman that I am, and I'm not sorry about her anymore. There's something else I want to say. Something I've thought about a lot in the months since, which is about what it means to be someone who moves fast through pain. Because there's a narrative that gets applied to women like me. A narrative that says the speed means shallowness. That processing quickly means not really feeling. That moving on without visible devastation means never having been truly invested. I want to be precise about how wrong that narrative is. The investment was real. The love was real. The grief was real and is still real in the way that important things leave marks, even after they stop being present. What's different is that I don't marinate in pain. I don't find purpose in suffering. I feel what I feel completely, and then I begin moving again. Not because I've finished grieving, but because motion is how I grieve. I carry the weight while I walk. That's just the architecture of who I am. And there's a specific strength in that architecture that I've spent too long apologizing for. The world is full of people who admire resilience in the abstract, but flinch at it up close. Who say they want someone strong, but mean they want someone who is strong in ways that are visible and dramatic. Strong in the ways that include the performance of suffering and the eventual triumph over it. The quiet version of resilience, the kind that doesn't make a spectacle of itself. The kind that simply gets up and moves before anyone has the chance to see it fall. That kind doesn't get the same recognition, but it's no less real. It's no less hard. I think about the woman I was trying to be in that relationship. The tamped down version. The one who breathed before reacting and waited before speaking, and gave space before demanding clarity. I understand why I tried to be her. I understand the impulse to soften yourself for someone you love, to make yourself easier to hold. But I also understand now, more clearly than I ever have, that the softening was costing me something I couldn't afford to keep losing. There is a version of compromise that is healthy. That is the natural adjustment of two people learning to occupy shared space without losing themselves. And there is a version of compromise that is erosion. That is the slow grinding down of something essential until you're left with a shape you don't recognize. I was doing the second kind. I didn't know it until it was over. The hardest part of being an Aries woman is not the fire. The fire gets all the attention. The impulsiveness and the directness and the occasional inability to suffer foolishness quietly. But those things are manageable. They're visible. They can be explained. The hardest part is the specific loneliness of knowing, always knowing, slightly ahead of the moment while everyone around you is still catching up. The knowing that has no evidence yet. The certainty that precedes proof. The instinct that lands before logic arrives to confirm it. Living in that gap between what you feel and what you can demonstrate is genuinely isolating. Because when you try to explain it, it sounds like paranoia. It sounds like someone looking for trouble. And so you learn, as I learned, to question what you know before anyone else has the chance to question it for you. That questioning cost me months. It cost me the peaceful version of the ending, the one that might have happened sooner, with less accumulated weight, if I'd trusted the feeling from the beginning. I'm not going to carry that as a punishment. I'm going to carry it as information. I'm 28 now. The relationship ended 8 months ago, and I am more myself than I have been in years, which is not something I would have predicted to say so quickly, but there it is. There's a specific relief in being in full possession of your own pace, your own instincts, your own way of knowing things and responding to them. It doesn't mean I've become closed. I'm not armored. I'm not the version of someone who came out of a betrayal resolved never to trust again, never to be vulnerable again. That's not how I work. The fire is not something that goes out. It metabolizes experience and continues burning. I will love again with the same completeness that I've always loved with, because anything less would be a disservice to whatever comes next. What's changed is that I will not again spend months arguing myself out of what I know. I will not perform a version of patience that requires me to silence the part of me that is most reliably accurate. I will not make myself smaller to make someone else more comfortable in the space that should be shared. The moment I found out, I was already gone, and going was the right thing. The speed of it was not a flaw. The speed of it was the truest thing about me, expressing itself clearly at the moment when clarity was the most important thing I had. I'm an Aries woman. I move fast. I know fast. I leave fast when leaving is what's needed. And I have learned, finally, to stop apologizing for the architecture that made me that way. The fire is not a flaw in my design. It's the design. And everything else, every relationship, every person who gets close enough to see it properly, will have to decide whether they're drawn to it or afraid of it. Because I'm done spending my energy on people who want the warmth, but not the heat. I am not a difficult woman. I am a woman who moves at her own pace, trusts her own knowing, and acts without waiting for permission from people who will never fully understand the speed at which I process the world. That used to feel like an apology waiting to happen. Now it just feels true. The day I walked out of that coffee shop, I didn't know exactly what was ahead of me. I knew it would involve feeling things I didn't want to feel and navigating grief on a timeline that wouldn't look like grief to anyone watching from the outside. I knew there would be moments late at night where the loss of what I'd imagined would settle on me with a specific heaviness that no amount of forward momentum could entirely outrun. And I knew I'd get through all of it, not because I'm exceptional in some way that others aren't, but because I was built for motion, and motion is a kind of survival. The stars didn't give me patience. They gave me clarity. They gave me the ability to know in an instant what others take months to understand. They gave me the fire that some people fear and some people love, and most people have complicated feelings about. And they gave me the cold precision that lives just underneath the fire. The part that knows when something is finished and doesn't wait for confirmation. Before acting on that knowledge, I don't regret the love. Love is never a mistake. What I regret is the compromise of myself in service of something that, it turned out, wasn't being treated with the same care. What I learned is that the compromise was always a loan, not a gift. And I've taken it back now. With interest. I am an Aries woman. And the second I found out, I was already gone. Not because I was running from something, because I was finally moving toward myself again. And that is a direction I will never apologize for choosing.